Okay. Uh, this section of scripture is sometimes called the second Galilean tour, and it is mainly outside of the synagogues, with maybe one exception. And this is something that you've got to decide, maybe with the help of others, but you've got to decide, does the section in Matthew 13:53 through 58 and Mark 6:1 through 6, is that a parallel account that is found in Luke 4? But Luke has just placed it at a different point in the story. If it's not a parallel account, then it's a second event of a rejection at Nazareth. Another example of a story like that in the Gospels. In the Gospel of John, the cleansing of the temple is at the first part of the book of John. In the Synoptic Gospels, it's at the end. Is there one event or is there two events? And there are arguments that can be made for either position that you take. In the Synoptic Gospels, the cleansing of the temple is the crisis that provokes the crucifixion. In the book of John, it's the raising of Lazarus from the death that provokes the crisis. Okay, so this is called the second tour of Galilee. The teaching is mainly outside the synagogues. And also in this time period, Jesus adopts the method of parables as his primary teaching method. And, our usual definition that the parables are an earthly story with a heavenly meaning is a workable definition, but it may not be complete. The reason for his doing parables, the people, mainly the religious leaders, have rejected his plain teaching. And by adopting the method of parables, he avoids open conflict until it is on God's timetable that he should die. Those inclined to spiritual truths can draw closer to God by hearing the parable. Those not willing to hear will only hear the story and will not be hardened any further in unbelief. But they may, by hearing the story, think about the story and think of an application that will draw them in. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, let's talk about the reaction to Jesus. If you're in Matthew 12, starting around verse 14, what do you see?
Well, the Pharisees are going out to see how they can plot and kill Jesus.
Okay. And then if you look at Mark 3 and Luke 6, you will throw in a couple of other groups there. You will throw in the scribes and the Herodians that are with them. So they have seen Jesus heal a man on the Sabbath day. And that upsets their way of thinking. So they're plotting to kill him. Now, how do the crowds of the people react to him?
Well, if I'm watching him kill people, I'm hoping he's gonna touch me or kill me, so I would be mesmerized or excited.
Okay. And
He's attracting multitudes.
Right.
Followers.
And why, and Laura answered this really, they are attracted to him because of what he does, not what he teaches. In fact, the crowds are so vast that they're almost endangering his physical life. Okay? Do you get that? So he will go out to the sea and set in a boat to teach them. Okay, now his family. And if you look in Mark 3, you can probably see this a little better than you can in, say, Matthew. What's his family thinking about this situation? And it's kind of an inclusive story. What?
He's crazy or out of his mind.
Right. They think he's out of his mind. And why? Why would they think he's out of his mind? There's one reason that's given there, is that kind of.
They thought he was possessed.
Okay, that's the religious leaders, more so than his family. His family is looking at him and saying, well, he's not taking care of himself. He's not eating. Now, let's give the family a little bit of a break here. I don't know how much the family remembers about Sepphoris. This would have been about AD 6. There was a rebellion in Sepphoris against the Romans. Popular guy. You know, stirred up a multitude. And over 2,000 Jews were crucified. So maybe that's in the background. That story's not anywhere in the New Testament, by the way, but it was an event that happened in that time period. So the family thought he was out of his mind. And when they do finally arrive in Mark 3, Jesus uses the time to say who his true family is. And who will that be? The ones that follow him. And specifically at that point, I think he's going to point to the 12. But the true family of God, or the true family of Christ, will be those who do the will of the Father. And that was true in that time period. It's true today. Okay. Are there any questions about that line of thought? Rambling, maybe. Any thoughts, comments that you guys want to make? Okay. If not, let's take a look at Luke 8, 1 through 3. And you're also going to have a little bit of a look at Mark 3, 13 through 19. Okay? So in Luke 8, it talks about the companions of Jesus on this tour. And Luke notes a couple of things that are specific to his gospel. He notes women. And he notes the prayer life of Jesus. Another characteristic of Luke's gospel, and this not so much now, but starting at chapter 9, verse 50, that's the trip to Jerusalem, the final trip. I talked about earlier that sometimes the Gospels writers rearrange the material to suit the story that they're telling. That doesn't mean that it's a made-up story. It doesn't mean that the events didn't occur. It just means that in ancient biographies, which the Gospels are kind of an ancient biography, they didn't necessarily write linear. Does that make sense? They arranged the material to convey the message that they wanted to convey about the Christ. So that's probably something you didn't need to hear at this point, but it's there. So let's talk about the companions of Jesus. So in Luke 8, 1 through 4, they're the women. First, it's mentioned, is Mary Magdalene, out of whom 7 demons were cast. Many times since Gregory the Seventh, I think, or Gregory the Great, we have tended to merge this story of Mary Magdalene with the woman of the sinful woman who anointed Jesus at the house of Simon. There's really no evidence that she's the same woman, but that's out there. Then there is Joanna, the wife of Chuza, the Herod steward. Then there is Susanna and many others. These women supported Jesus and his ministry. They supplied his needs. And it's interesting that these women followed him from Galilee to Jerusalem for the last time. They were at the cross. They were at the resurrection. Okay. Don't know much about these women. Some we don't even know their names, the many others. But like Joanna, the wife of Chusa or Cuza, Herod Stewart, this dude's got some power, okay? He's managing the affairs of Herod Antipas. I think that's the right Herod. Okay. So, let's think about the other companions of Jesus on this tour. The 12. Again, for the most part, we know very little about them. Some of them we know something about. Many of them, all we've got is the name and maybe one or two statements that they made somewhere in one of the Gospels. But overall, we know very little about them. Let's get the importance of these guys, first of all. In Luke chapter 6, I think it is, 12 through 16, we see that Jesus prayed all night before he made this choice. He prayed all night before he selected the 12. We know from the book of John that he met many of them earlier when he was in that Jerusalem Judean ministry. And then about a year later, there was a more formal call to some of them. Does that make sense? Maybe? Okay. So let's look at the names at least. So Simon, who's called Peter, and in John 1, verse 40, we see that how Simon became Peter. Jesus gave him a new name, Cephas, which means rock. Now, when we think of Peter, we may not think of him as being rock-like in some of the stories that we read in the Gospels. Or we may think of him being rock-like, in that he was stubborn or something. But actually, probably Jesus gave him the name to say, this is what you will become. And so, Simon. What else do you know about Simon? Okay, he denied Christ 3 times. That shows that he's not quite rock-like yet. right? Wasn't educated in the sense of what the Pharisees and the religious leaders thought of educated.
He had a brother who was also an apostle. Yeah.
Okay. And what else do you know about him? He's married. See, you know more about him than maybe you do others. What business was he in? He's a fisherman. So you've got the first four: Simon, Andrew. Andrew brought Peter to Jesus. And when you see him in the book of John, that's mainly what he's doing. He brings the little boy with the loaves and the fishes. He brings with Philip the Gentiles or the Greeks at the end of the gospel. And then you have James and John, who are the sons of Zebedee, also brothers, called Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. And we assume that they got that name because they had a temper. And an example of that temper is Luke 9:53 through 54, where the Samaritans won't let them come through the village or stay there. And they say, do you want us to call fire down like Elijah? Did I get the name right, or is it Elisha? One of those prophets.
And Peter, James, and John were that inner circle.
Yes, that inner circle. And you see that in a story that takes place here. The raising of Jairus' daughter. That's probably the first story that we see where that inner circle takes place. Now, another idea behind the name Boanerges may just mean they were full of energy. Okay? But more likely, you'll see the idea of their temper as how they got this name. Okay, so that's the first four. That is generally considered the group that's closer to Jesus. Then you start with another group. And by the way, Matthew 10 probably records the group as they're sent out on the mission and connects them together as the way they're listed. Probably I should have said this first. There are 4 listings of the apostles, and some of them have some variations. They're Mark 3:13 through 19, Matthew 10, 1 through 4, Luke 6, 12 through 16, Acts 1, 12 through 14. Okay, so you come to the next group. Philip. Name means lover of horses. He found his friend Nathanael in John 1:45 and brought him to Jesus. He is from Bethsaida, where Simon and Andrew are from. The next one listed is Bartholomew. That's not really a name. That means son of Talmai. We generally think that this is Nathaniel, who is called in John 1:47 through 49 as an Israelite with no guile or without deceit. We know he's from Cana, where Jesus performed his first miracle, John 21:2. Matthew. His name means gift of God. Now, we don't know if Matthew was a name that Jesus gave this disciple, or if he already had that name, as well as Levi. We know he was a tax collector. And according to Mark 2:14, maybe another group of brothers here. Mark 2:14, he is listed as the son of Alphaeus. You move on down this list, you have James, son of Alphaeus. And let's just get James and this out of the way. Some think this Alphaeus is the same guy as Clopas in Luke 24. Don't know that. Okay. So the next one in the list is Thomas. He's often called Didymus, which means twin. A legend, the reason he got that name was because he looked like Jesus. But we probably do it like this. Well, he has faith and he has doubt. So he's kind of got a twin nature. He's kind of got a double nature. But we overplay Thomas's doubt. That may be a good characteristic. Calling him Doubting Thomas all the time may not be really fair. He kind of had a fatalistic outlook in one of the situations. When Jesus was going back to Judea, he said, okay, let's go with him so we'll die with him. But he was committed. Next guy, we already did James, son of Alphaeus. Thaddeus, name means praise. If you read some of the older versions of Matthew 10, he has another name, Lepidus. And if you're looking at Luke 6, verse 16, he's either James, Judas, son of James. So maybe you have a father-son team here. Then Simon the Zealot. In Matthew, you may have Canaan or Canaanite. This has nothing to do with him being from Cana or a Canaanite. It is a translation that actually means zealous or zealot. We generally associate him with a group that's opposed to the Roman rule. Or if you wanted to take the other way of looking at it just means he's zealous. But that makes for an interesting situation. You have brothers, you have business partners. With Matthew and Simon the Zealot, you have political rivals within this group.
What is the person?
Yeah. You have family, you have business partners, you have friends. If Philip and Bartholomew, you have acquaintances. So it's intermingled. It's like society.
It also shows that brings out that they didn't understand Jesus' message completely at that time.
Right.
If he was worried about kingdom on the earth,
Right.
Roman rule, that was conflict.
Yeah. Okay. Now we come to the next one. Judas Iscariot. Question's always there. Why? Well, let's talk about Judas just a bit. His name may mean man from Kerioth, a Judean village. And if that's the case, he's the only Judean in the bunch. Or his name may come from something called Sicarius, which means assassin, or one who carries a dagger or a short sword under his cloak, a terrorist. You see that idea expressed in Acts 21:38 about when they asked Paul, "Aren't you that Egyptian who led a group out and they perished, a group of terrorists?" And then it always ends the list, the one who betrayed him. Here's some other things that we see in John 6, 70 and 71. Jesus says, "I've chosen 12 of you, and one of you is a devil." John 12, verse 6 says he was a thief. He kept the bag. And one of the other places, I didn't put the reference down, but Satan entered his heart. A theologian was once asked the question, why did he choose Judas Iscariot? The answer he gave was, I have a harder question. Why did he choose me? And we don't know. We don't know lots of things about the story of Judas Iscariot. Some of the things that we should think about the disciples. Matthew 19:28 says they will have a future role in judgment. Ephesians 2:20 through, no, I guess it's just 20. Connected with, I'm going to connect it with it anyway, whether that's a good thing or not. Matthew 16, Peter's confession. The disciples have a foundational role in the formation of the church. And then the final thing, and also a mystery question, Revelation 20, verse 14. They're remembered forever as the 12 foundations of the holy city. And who gets the title? Matthias or Paul? As the 12th one. Okay, any questions or comments about any of that?
You know, Greg, I was just thinking, it's a real interesting thing going on with Peter and Judas.
Yeah.
The big game is the battle between Satan and Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Peter is tested.
Yeah.
And it comes out in different points where you see the mental attitude of Peter, and Judas is placed in the same situation. He's tested, and you see the opposite.
Yeah.
The big game is Jesus conquering Satan.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that, you know, you sort of like Judas is an unlucky pawn in this battle between Christ and Satan. But, you know, choices are made, and you see the two different choices.
Right. And I'm so glad you brought that out. I didn't even see Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Judas betrayed him. Judas was sorry. He was remorseful. Peter had his doubt about, or at least I think he did, about whether Jesus would accept him after the resurrection. But Judas didn't wait for the resurrection. Yeah, Bubba.
I'm sitting here talking about Judas. I can't recall, but you talked a lot about love and money. I think they say more than he did that every time. I can't recall ever them referring about the concern about love and money in the Judas story.
Yeah.
And that's what Judas did, he betrayed from money.
Mm-hmm.
And just, you know, the thing with that, I don't know why, you know, I mean, that was pretty serious crime, pretty serious offense that he did.
Yeah.
I think it would be worse, to betray Jesus like he did. All about love and money. We should have plowed over that.
Yeah. The Judas story causes us to go, why? A lot. Or at least it does me. Okay. Let's take a look at Matthew 13 briefly. So we talked a little bit about Jesus adopting the method of parables as a way of teaching. And he's doing this from a boat on the Sea of Galilee. This is the first time it's not the first time he uses parables. Can't say that. Parable has a much broader application than sometimes what we do with it. We think of the stories, but parable also means short sayings like proverbs. An example that was used last week, I think, about lighting a lamp and where you put the lamp. Do you put it under a bushel? Do you put it under the bed? No, that doesn't make any sense. You put it somewhere where it can be seen and give light. That is a parable. We wouldn't necessarily think of it as a parable. The wise man building his house on the rock and the foolish man building his house on the sand is an example of parables. We talked a little bit already about why he used the parables. So let's run through this list of parables, and then we'll talk a little bit about one or two of them. So we have the first parable is the parable of the sower. And we like to do something with that we should leave alone. And I'll point it out why. We like to call this one the parable of the soils. Matthew 13:18 would give us a reason for not doing that. Right? And I know why we do that. The parable of the weeds, or the parable of the tares, is in Matthew 13:24 through 30. And these are the only two parables that Jesus explains: the parable of the sower and the parable of the tares. This parable is only found in Mark, the parable of the growing seed. The parable of the mustard seed is found in both Matthew and Mark. The parable of the leaven is found in Matthew. Then there's the hidden treasure, the pearl of great price, the fishing net. And this one is an iffy one, the household treasure. Is that a parable or not? Okay. Now, like I said, only two of the parables are explained: the parable of the sower and the parable of the weeds. In the parable of the sower, we talk about the various types of soil. We talk about the seed. The seed is the word. The sower will be the one who preaches, teaches the word of the kingdom, the word of God. Mark starts the parable of the sower and ends it the same way. He says, listen. Listen. The pathway, hard. Now, most likely in this story, many times the seed was sown before the ground was plowed. So the sower goes out, he throws the seed about, and then the plowman comes by and plows it in. So the sower would not know that, okay, this area has significant amount of rock. This area has a significant amount of weeds growing and be choked out. The sower's responsibility is to sow the seed. And perhaps if we look at the story like this, we see this parable as explained only to the 12 that are to be sent out on mission. Jesus is saying to them, don't be discouraged when the seed doesn't take root. It doesn't grow. It doesn't produce. What does take root and what does produces an abundant harvest, 30, 60, 100-fold.
You know, Greg, you're leading out on the line here also. The soul has to be prepared.
Yeah.
You may have said that.
Yep. There's an observation, and thanks for bringing that out, Chris. There's a commentary that's online that I look at quite often. It's called The Enduring Word. And it asks the question, how am I like, the Christian? How is the Christian like each one of these soils? And this was a pretty good thing. Sometimes we allow no room in our lives for the word, like the wayside. Sometimes in the stony places, flashes of enthusiasm and then it's over. Okay. The word burns out of us. Then the thorns, the cares of the world constantly threaten to choke out the word. And we're fruitless. Quickly, these two, and then I am done. The two parables, the mustard seed and the leaven, we generally see as positive. The church starts small, the kingdom of God starts small, and it increases in size phenomenally. There is another interpretation to those two parables that we should consider. What rests in the mustard seed plant? The birds. The birds are symbols of evil. Go back to the story of the sower. What did the birds do? Yeah, they're a symbol of corruption. Leaven is most often a symbol of corruption in the Bible. So, that's all I have, and for what it's worth, think about it.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg.